Hey everybody, welcome to the 12-Step Buddhist. That's me. Could be you if you're listening and reading the book. Podcast, episode 13. Getting a lot of visiting teachers these days, and I'm not sure why. Maybe because it's spring and they're afraid to come to Portland otherwise. Well, we have Darren Main here. Last week we had author Kevin Griffin. This week we've got author Darren Main from beautiful San Francisco. Hi.
Hey, how you doing?
I feel all right. So he just came in after a weekend of teaching yoga. What was that like?
Oh, it was really fun. I love teaching in Portland in the spring.
In the spring.
In the spring. Love is in the air.
So we want to talk a little bit today about yoga and recovery.
Sure.
Darren interviewed me on his podcast where we went through all the 12 steps and talked about Buddhism. And I'm interested, there are a few chapters or movements or little grassroots things around the country where people are calling it yoga and recovery or yoga of recovery and trying to integrate, assimilate, affiliate. Let's just start with some of your thoughts. First, I'd like you to name the books of yours that people should buy right now to find out more about you. Why don't you start with that, and then I'll dig in with my question about yoga and recovery.
Sure. The most important thing is buy my books.
Buy all of the books.
Yeah, all of them.
Immediately. You can get a package deal on Amazon these days.
Yeah.
If you like this, you'll probably like that.
Well, my most popular book is called Yoga on the Path of the Urban Mystic, and it's really an exploration of yogic philosophy, but with a sort of modern twist to it, a little modern spin to make it more accessible to the modern reader who's not off living in an ashram or a monastery somewhere. And I bring into that book a lot of my own personal recovery. I got my start in yoga out of the 12 steps. I was looking for some way to practice the 11th step. And, I would ask people at meetings, and nobody seemed to know how to seek through prayer and meditation. And so I found this yoga class and realized that it was exactly what I needed. So really, a lot of my own experience is rooted in the 12 steps, and then got transitioned over into my understanding of yoga and how to practice. And then I also have a book on the Wizard of Oz as a spiritual metaphor, and I have an introduction to meditation, and I have a book on how to talk to Christians about homosexuality, which has nothing to do with yoga.
So which came first, recovery or yoga? I didn't catch that.
Recovery came first.
Okay.
And
you're comfortable talking about that a little bit today?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm an open book.
Okay. So as a recovering person, you found yoga as part of your how much of a part of your spiritual practice is yoga? Obviously, you're a teacher. You go all over the place and teach. I've talked to you. I already know this, that yoga is almost, would it be fair to say that yoga is a little bit more of a replacement for you than the 12 steps or the regular 12-step recovery typical involvement at this point?
I don't know as I would say replacement, but I don't go to many meetings anymore. Yoga is definitely my primary source for spirituality. That said, the 12 steps are a fundamental part of my daily life, and they dovetail and integrate nicely with my yoga practice.
And you feel that they're integrated. That's really the key thing, is the ability to integrate. How rare are you as an individual in the ability to even comprehend what integration means? And please share a little bit about what it does mean to you.
Sure. Well, I think in the beginning I would go to meetings, and there was sort of that, if you don't go to meetings, you're going to get high.
Right.
And I started doing yoga, and I started to have this feeling that my yoga practice was complementing what I was getting from the meetings. And some of my sponsor at the time and other people in meetings felt very uncomfortable with that. It's either go to meetings or get high. It's either the bar or the church basement. And it took me a little while to really start to embrace the two as part of my own personal recovery. And of course, my own personal recovery is mine. It doesn't necessarily apply to anybody else.
So you're not telling people, hey, come over here and do my yoga class. You don't need those old stinking meetings. You're saying this is my experience.
As a matter of fact, a lot of people, you asked me if what came first, recovery or yoga. I have a lot of people who start doing yoga and through that practice realize, wow, I need to clean up the rest of my life, and my drug and alcohol use or my sex addiction or whatever is a serious problem, and I refer them to the appropriate 12-step meeting.
Let's talk about this for a second,
Sure.
because yogic breathing, something that we do in the tantric traditions of Vajrayana, Tibetan Buddhism, and I've noticed in my participation in these practices that the beam becomes a little narrower in terms of what I can get away with, just about toxins I can put in my body, even my thoughts and my views. In other words, it becomes kind of a razor's edge, as if recovery already isn't, as if Dharma already isn't. But when you particularly get involved in some of these yogic transmissions, which I know you just came off of, doing a whole day of breathing, right?
Yeah.
I find that it kind of puts you in a little bit of a catch-22 situation.
Yeah.
Is that what you were kind of alluding to?
Yeah, well, I think yoga, the core value of yoga, the various styles of yoga, is to basically have us address karma, which is cause and effect. Most of us separate cause and effect with this little thing called time. So you can smoke a bunch of cigarettes today and you seem to pay no consequences until you get emphysema 20 or 30 years down the road. When we start doing yoga, you collapse that time interval in between. So that
your karmic debts come due
much
sooner.
quicker.
So you've got to do work.
Right, you have to pay the piper.
Do you warn people
sooner.
of that when they come to your class?
Absolutely not. They never come to my class. No, I do talk about it a lot. But, the more you do yoga or meditation or any spiritual practice, including the 12 steps, but particularly yoga and meditation, you find that your ability to misbehave and seemingly not pay consequences because there isn't this big gaping window of time in between gets greatly reduced. So if I go out and I stay out late tonight, I'm going to be wiped out tomorrow. A few years ago, I could go out dancing or something, and I couldn't do it every night, but I could do it. Now I don't even think about it. It's it's just not worth it.
Well, the kind of the reason, and I'm a little confused still about this, and maybe you can shed some light on it. I know I listened to a podcast. One of the first ones I listened to of yours was where you talked with a yogic scholar, talking about the roots of the transmissions in India and so on, and the differences between Bali's yoga and yoga as a spiritual practice. Although probably there is probably some correlation, anyways, even if we were not really aware of it. But in the Vajrayana systems, there's sort of a preparatory path, a preliminary path. In some teachers will say, boy, you really need to master single pointed concentration before you begin to work with your prana, vital life force energy, and because you have to have a certain ability, a meditative equipoise. Because if not, you can really create. I mean, you can be creating karma now that's going to come due. Maybe even make yourself sick. So some of the warnings have gone. And for this and other reasons, many of those types of practices have been kept secret, which now a lot of these things are coming out. And maybe it's dangerous. I don't know if some people dabble in this or that. But how do you approach that risk with people, that volatility, and are there secret traditions in the tradition of yoga? Are there secret practices in the tradition of yoga that you practice, or are they, or is all this pretty much wide open for anybody to participate in?
Well, with the internet, there seems to be no secrets left anymore, so it's not too difficult to figure stuff out if you really want to go digging for it. For me as a teacher, to be ethical, I will only teach you what I feel you can safely handle.
Right.
For instance, I was teaching a breathing workshop today, and it was a very mixed group of students. Some people were brand new to yoga, and some people had been practicing for quite a while. I taught them some pretty significant breathing techniques, and many people had a lot of emotional release and felt a lot of energy moving in their body. But I didn't even come close to sharing with them some of the more advanced techniques because it would just be too much for someone to handle. It's sort of like in the 12 steps. You start with the first step. You just surrender. You don't worry about writing your fourth and fifth.
You're not going to go out and make amends like Andy Dick did on the first episode of Sober Celebrity Rehab. He's making amends to his son. He's got 3 days sober.
Yeah,
probably not that.
You're not ready for it.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place for things.
You got to build into it.
And for some people that may be years, and for other people it may be days. And that in the yogic tradition, the whole idea of the guru-disciple relationship, the idea that you're working with a teacher who knows the path and can sort of guide you and you individually. I think is important. Now, it doesn't have to be some guy sitting on a mountaintop with a robe. But
you're
just
an urban mystic.
That's me, urban mystic.
You're a gay dude living in San Francisco, walking around, doing the whole San Francisco culture, and yet, are you a guru? Do you consider yourself a guru, or are you offended by that term?
I wouldn't want to be a guru. It's too much responsibility.
But you do have some responsibility to the well-being. How serious do you take that? I know people come into my groups and I don't consider myself their guru or even their teacher. I'm really a group facilitator. I'm sort of facilitating the discussion and the experience. That said, there are some techniques that are covered, but I kind of feel that even if that person is a brand new newcomer or somebody looking for an alternative to 12-step or whatever, I kind of feel that I have a permanent responsibility if they ever need me or if they ever have a question or a problem. Do you know what I mean? But if you have, like, your classes, I've heard from friends in San Francisco, are jam-packed, every single class, waiting room, whatever. You've got a lot of people coming for your teachings. How do you deal with that, and what degree of responsibility, or at what point do you kind of have to separate yourself from it?
Well, I take very seriously the whole code of ethics that any professional, whether it's your doctor, your lawyer, your accountant, things like confidentiality, things like not sleeping with your students or your clients, whatever they may be. I take that very seriously, and I think a lot of yoga teachers don't, and I think that's very, very harmful. It's sort of like in the 12 steps, you don't sleep with a newcomer. It's just not appropriate. You can do tremendous damage.
Unless you go to Night Owls here in Portland at 11 p.m. and they forgot to mention that rule, but we won't go there.
Oh, well, you should have told me about that when I first got here. Now that I'm getting ready to get on a plane. At the same time, I try very, very hard not to allow myself to be put on a pedestal because, in all honesty, I'm every bit as screwed up as the students who take my classes. I struggle with my diet. I struggle with my anger. I struggle with everything. I'm better at managing it today than I was 5 years ago or even 5 days ago because it's a progressive process. And I might be a little more skilled than some of my students who are just new to the spiritual path. But when you line me up next to the person new to yoga or new to recovery and somebody like the Buddha, I'm way, 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 way closer to the newcomer in AA than I am to Gautama or Krishna or Jesus or any of the great masters. So to allow yourself to be put on that pedestal, the only thing people like more than putting you on a pedestal is knocking you off like you're a piñata.
Yeah, I get some of those sometimes. They come on my Facebook or whatever, and they're just waiting to give me some clever, I call them Zentelectuals, because they, especially Huffington Post articles, I write for that. And I don't care how nice you are and how generic you try to make the article. There are people whose mission it is to try to argue with you. And if you jump in that, you get involved in this whole upsetting interchange. So I just try to give them a little, and back off. But that's a really interesting point because people are not, this is something unique to being experienced in the 12-step path and being able to admit our humanness, our shortcomings, our areas where we need growth. This is probably an advantage. I mean, it's both a blessing and a curse, right? It's probably I think of it as an advantage in my own work, and I think you do too. But if I try to talk to the typical other kind of teacher, the Zen guy, or, people want to put themselves a little bit on a pedestal too as teachers. What do you have to say about that?
I think we all have egos, and it's very tempting. We all like to be loved, and and when you teach somebody, when you give somebody a skill that they previously didn't have, be that learning to meditate or helping them get sober or teaching them to do yoga or whatever it happens to be, there's gratitude there. But I always tell people it's sort of like Pavlov's dog, that I happen to be present in the room when you're doing your yoga and you come in feeling lousy or stressed out or achy and pained or whatever degree of suffering you're in, and you feel better when you leave. You associate me with feeling better because I happen to be there when it happens. But I'm just the bell. I'm not the dog food. And we, as teachers, should never lose sight of that. It's not about me. It's about the yoga.
Do you train teachers?
I do. I lead a teacher training in San Francisco.
And so you kind of have some of this philosophy worked out already.
Yes, and one of the big parts of our teacher training is we talk about ethics constantly. We have a specific ethics class, but then with everything we do, it's like, what do you do when a student is sexually attracted to you and hits on you? Because they want to have sex with you, they want to go out with you, they think you're wonderful. But somebody's got to be the adult in the room.
Right. Somebody said on their Facebook status recently, don't fuck the newcomer even if they want you to, unquote. Thank you, NA. So I think in NA that's kind of a little saying that they have. It's hard to say. It's hard to say no. We all want to be loved.
Yeah.
I mean, this doesn't happen to me. I'm just saying.
I doubt that.
But you
probably have people throwing themselves at you.
People come up with the puppy dog eyes sometimes, and I go, hey, look. Check right now.
Yeah.
Don't put me on that pedestal.
They see something in their teacher, but they also only see you in a very limited capacity.
Sure.
When somebody comes to my yoga class,
when they know you from meetings, they don't feel that way. Trust me.
They know all your dirty laundry. But somebody comes to my yoga class and I'm soft-spoken and I'm nice and I'm listening to them. I'm asking them about their issues.
You're in that zone.
Right, and in that moment, I'm great. But then follow me home and ask my roommate what a joy I am to be around. 50% of the time, I'm bitter and miserable.
I mean, I had a girl that comes to my groups. She's just got a couple weeks sober, got hit by a truck, and needed a ride. It's not too good driving. So I was driving with her, and I said, "Oh shit! Now you're gonna tell people. That Buddhist guy who does that group? I drove with him." Let me tell you how he really is, it's an interesting shift. Kevin Griffin and I talked about that too. It's an interesting and perplexing shift to move in. I have to kind of understand what my identity is and who I am in the totality of my life. When I'm sitting on the cushion, I kind of have this whole sacred reverence for the Dharma thing going on. I ask that I be guided and I try to do the real right thing. But when I'm off the cushion, I'm not, and I'm sitting next to you at a meeting, trust me, I am not trying to pontificate or give you teachings, and sometimes it's a weird flip in my own head to go in and out of that because it confuses me, but it's been a great growth process.
Well, I had a teacher for a while, and he, when he was playing the role of the guru, he would not take questions unless he was wearing his robes. And there was nothing magical about the robes, but it was like, okay, the robes are on, now I'm guru. Okay, the robes are off, now we can be friends. Okay. Because they're two very different relationships. Yeah. Your spiritual guidance counselor, your guru, your teacher, whatever, isn't there to be your friend. They're there to point out all the stuff you need to look at, which is usually the stuff you least want to look at. And, so, and to do that with compassion and all of those things, it's a very fine line to walk.
Well, also, I had a sponsee once that first thing I said to him, because he had 11 years and I had 9 at the time, I said, I'm not going to be your friend. Because if I'm your friend, I care what you think, and I'm not going to be able to call you out on your bullshit. And we actually became friends and sort of couldn't sponsor him anymore. But how do you deal with that in the 12 step? Tysa sponsors a lot of people, and she tells them the same thing. I can't just sit and be your buddy. In other words, that's sort of an exclusive relationship. There is no kind of flipping back and forth very much. And I guess that's one way. It's not the only way of thinking about it, but do you fraternize with your serious yoga students very much, or do you try to keep that separate?
For me, it's a case-by-case
Okay.
thing, but generally speaking, no. I mean, there have been students that I've become friends with, but the relationship changes. And I think whatever that is, it has to be a very conscious change.
I see.
You know, where
and both people have to be aware of the dynamics,
right?
And the switching of the roles.
Either I'm going to be your teacher or I'm going to be your friend. And
Right.
if I'm going to be your friend, you can still maybe come take my class.
Right.
But it's different. It's a different relationship. So, yeah, I think the conscious awareness is the key.
Well, I guess we're getting a signal from Tysa that we've probably got about 5 minutes. Is that about right? Maybe 5 to 7 more minutes, or what do you think?
Sure, unless you can call Southwest and tell them to hold the flight
Tell
for
them to
me.
hold it. Well, we're about 12 to 13 minutes from there. This is like a raw podcast, everybody. As I keep saying, this is not Viacom. This is my living room. Okay.
It's a great. That fish tank is amazing. I want to go swimming in it.
You guys can see pictures of my fish tank on YouTube under Darren Littlejohn, and you can subscribe to those videos. Okay, so let's go back to something, because this is deep. This whole trip about, like, what's a guru complex? Do you remember people from whatever 12-step program you were previously affiliated with, or however you look at that? Do you find people that have the guru complex who begin to assume this role as this cost me? I didn't have the guru complex then, but this attitude of arrogance with time sober was part of what cost me my 10 years when I relapsed. And there's quite a few people I've seen in 12-step who kind of have themselves set up. They've got their chair at their meeting and their flock of sponsees. And I think it goes to their head. And I think it kind of goes against the whole trip of, trying to dissolve the ego a little bit through the process, through any spiritual process, but particularly through the 12-step. So how do you deal with, for example, my question is, what is the guru complex from any perspective that comes up for you? And how would you deal with it if it came up?
Yeah. Well, I think all of us, everyone can fall prey to this, and we all will, as long as we're unenlightened beings. I think that whenever you are in a student-teacher relationship or a sponsor-sponsee relationship, you have to be asking yourself, am I in this relationship to serve you, the student, or am I in this relationship to feed my own ego? And it's sort of like a marble cake. You can't really, it's nothing is black or white. I mean,
my old sponsor used to say, I don't get to know when I'm the teacher or the student in the relationship. Yeah. And I love that flexibility because it can flip-flop during the course of the conversation.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing better than hanging out with somebody who you're sponsoring or who's a student, because they ask questions that make you think about your own spirituality. But I think if I'm in this relationship to bolster my ego, because you coming to me for advice and for
makes me feel important.
If it makes me feel important and puffs up my chest, that's really dangerous. It's dangerous for me, and it's dangerous for you.
And it's even more dangerous, as a true yogi, as a teacher, as a holder of your lineage, that for you to walk on that line is even more dangerous than the person that doesn't have that amount of training or responsibility.
One of my teachers, Amrit Desai, before he got kicked out for being inappropriate with students, one of the last things in one of his last darshans, he said, the truth may set you free, but it may crucify you first. And then he got booted out because all of this stuff came out. And frankly, I think he's a better teacher now, having been fallen from grace and had to face that, his inappropriate behavior. It went to his head. People throwing themselves at him, and the rationalization of, well, I'm loving you unconditionally, and all these other women too. And it just sort of, it got tainted, and I think he's a better teacher now because he's more human.
Now, as a person in recovery, I have brain trauma. I'm really down with the brain trauma neuroscience of addiction trip lately. And I get that I have trust issues. And when my sponsor said to me, like 5 years ago, man, you need to get a guru. I said, fuck a guru. I do not do guru, okay? And then I got a guru. I mean, I went on a path to find that, but I try to listen to, I don't ask people's advice if I'm not willing to follow their advice. So I actually went down that. But when sometimes like on the internet, if I'm, some people take some of my quotes from my articles and take them out of context. People, even, Buddhists who are in more of a sutra tradition of Buddhism or whatever, will really take issue with the whole, I mean, the old Dharma punks, I mean, kind of the main philosophy, one of the points that the guy makes is, hey, we're not trying to have a hierarchy here, even though, I'm being the teacher. And as you know, in the 12 steps, we're supposed to be one drunk or one addict talking to another. But how do we reconcile this? How do we integrate this whole idea of being a person in recovery, probably, let's just say brand new newcomer, let's say somebody having a problem with sex addiction or alcohol, they show up at your class, they dig you as a teacher, they want to be into yoga, but they're not too keen on the idea of a quote-unquote guru, spiritual teacher. They really don't like that sort of overly Christian sort of, theology perspective of the 12 steps. What's your advice to that person? And how would you guide them now we're getting into kind of the crux of my whole reason for wanting to talk to you today. How do you deal with guiding people on that who aren't really going to fall into the super hardcore, I'm going to follow the guru no matter what, even if it means I die, or I'm going to follow my AA or NA or whatever. What advice do you have, or how do you routinely deal with those people if you know that they're needing to be in recovery or wanting to be?
Yeah. Well, I encourage people to explore. If somebody comes to my class, they're either going to like my class or they're not. And if they don't, or they, go to other teachers. Explore a variety of things.
If you don't like this meeting, there's plenty more today.
Yeah, like I've heard people say that, I don't like AA. I went to an AA meeting once and I hated it. I'm like, well, how many AA meetings there are in this world and how different they all are?
They're different every meeting because there's a different chairperson, different mix of people.
Yeah, different focus. So I think that just encouraging people to think for themselves and to explore,
And you can't tell an AA guy think for yourself because they're going to say, oh, no, I do not trust my thinking. It says think. That doesn't apply to me. Yeah. Buddha said think for yourself, but that doesn't apply to me as an addict.
I think this is where yoga and the 12 steps might disagree.
Okay.
At least a little bit. Yoga is a science in the sense that you're running an experiment. So you come to the yoga mat and you do these poses, you do these breathing techniques, you meditate, and you ask, how do I feel? How does it feel when I do this? What are the results of doing this practice? Now, if you feel better, if you feel closer to God or your spirituality or whatever you want to call it, then by all means do more of it. But if you don't feel better when you do certain things, if certain things are injuring your body or distracting you in some way,
or your teacher's putting their hand on your knee while you're talking.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's doing that.
He's looking at me that way, and it's making me feel like it's a sexual come on or whatever.
Yeah, like listen to what you're experiencing, and I think the same is true for anything. I mean, in the sense that, like AA. How did all that drinking work out for you? I mean, look at the bigger picture. Every time you drink, you got drunk, you fell down, you wrecked your car, you got in a fight with your spouse, or whatever. I mean, it doesn't take too much to run that experiment. How many times do you have to run it to see if it's working for you? If you're honest.
But there's a
And the same
balance.
is true with your spirituality. I mean, run the experiment. Sit on the meditation cushion, 5 days in a row and see how you feel after the end of 5 days. Are you more peaceful?
Well,
Yes.
that's kind of what I'm getting to, is that for me, I have to really be, and maybe this is just me, but I don't know. I mean, I have to really be able to get into some uncomfortable territory, like in therapy, like in the 12 steps, like in meditation. Do you know what I mean? And in that case, that hypothesis of do I feel like when I first started sitting Zen, it was like first 6 months, wow, I feel more peaceful. Then things began to emerge, that I had to deal with. So how do we balance that when spiritual practice becomes something other than just trying to test it out by feeling more comfortable and being willing to dig into the material that's really necessary.
Yeah. In yoga, we look at the difference between pain and suffering. I always say pain is stubbing your toe, suffering is what your mind does with it. Life is not always comfortable. If you want to lose weight, you can go run on that treadmill and you can go on a diet, and those may be uncomfortable things to do. Changing your diet is not easy, right? It's going to bring up some discomfort. Going to the gym every day is going to be uncomfortable. But if you look at again, coming back to karma, you look at the cause and then you look at the effect, which may be separated by a little bit of time. And then look at it that way, as opposed to that instant gratification that addicts love so much.
Right.
Then you can say, okay, yeah, it is uncomfortable to go to therapy or to meditate every day.
Or sit in this yoga position.
The effect of that, which may be a couple days or even 6 months down the road, is that I'm a more peaceful person, that I've grown in some way, that I feel better about myself and my outlook on life, and I actually stop and smell the flowers once in a while, whatever. That's the key right there. Pain, on the other hand, is where your body or your heart are telling you, you're in danger right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's probably painful for somebody who's codependent to stay in a relationship with somebody who's abusive or an active alcoholic. And, there might be a little bit of sitting with that discomfort, but ultimately, that pain is telling you, you don't belong here. And learning to tease out the difference between pain and suffering are two different things.
Now, would I learn that if I lived in San Francisco and I went to your class every week and you never said a word to me about it? Do you believe that the process of practicing yoga kind of helps you do that, even if you're not consciously trying to practice it that way?
I see that all the time,
Okay.
actually. I have one student who came to my class. He was very, very overweight and was sweating when he walked in the door. And I thought, I'm going to kill him, because he walked into my really vigorous class. And he, all of a sudden, I noticed he kept coming. And a few months down the road, I'm like, wow, have you lost some weight? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what diet are you doing? He's like, I'm really not doing a diet. I just don't feel like eating junk anymore. And so you see that sort of magical transformation that happens under the surface. Now, I think it helps if you understand the mechanics of it. You know what I mean? Like two addicts talking to each other, there's some kind of magic that happens there, even if you don't understand the how and the why. But if you do understand the how and the why, it makes us a little more willing, most people anyway, a little more willing to do the legwork, to really amp up the practice.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go to the edge like the guys, like the guru guy, giving it all a bad name in Sedona recently with the sweat lodge and the people died and all that stuff. And he's like, you got to go past it. You got to sit through it no matter if you feel like you're going to die. I mean, at some point, we have to understand that even though we have to be willing to ask for advice and follow some advice, we really do have to temper and balance that with some sort of inner common sense.
Well, if you went to the doctor and the doctor said, I got my license to practice medicine off a matchbook cover, and I'd like to take out one of your kidneys.
Right.
You'd say, I think I'm going to get a second opinion on this. There's nothing wrong with doing that in the spiritual world. As a matter of fact, I recommend it.
Scott Peck says that in The Road Less Traveled.
Yeah.
Be a good consumer when it comes to, I think he was talking about therapy at the time.
Yeah. If your sponsor is telling you, the best thing we can do for your recovery is for you to have sex with me,
right,
then maybe you might want to ask a few other people in the program,
check up people.
Or if somebody in yoga is saying, you've got a hip replacement and I want you to do something that your physical therapist has told you not to do, ask a few other yoga teachers, ask a few other physical therapists, gather the information, because ultimately your safety, your responsibility, your recovery is your responsibility, no one else's.
And avoid hysterical thinking and advice, as it says in the AA Big Book, and avoid extremes, as it says in the Dharma. Find the middle way. And I like to, and we're going to wrap up now, I like to always advise people to do what I do, which is to find an integrated path where we have a care management team. And not that we're going to check everybody against each other until we get the answer that we want to hear, but to have that sort of committee that we say, here's my major important decision. What do you think? And then ultimately the decision is our own.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
This has really been fun.
Amazing. I loved interviewing you for my podcast, and but it's even more fun when we do it face to face.
Well, I'm going to go to your class next time I'm down in San Francisco because I love being down there, and somehow I'm going to have to make that a priority and a point to come and see you.
You guys all heard it. You're the witness.
Yeah. Now you're going to hold me to it. All right, everybody, checking out. Peace.